Happy Tolkien Week as we continue our ongoing rewatch of all of Peter Jackson's adaptation of the Tolkien novels, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Let's go on an adventure! So we first watched the biographical film Tolkien that was released back in 2019, shortly before things really changed in our world. I'm very excited because today we get to watch Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Hobbit, which he translated into 3 films, which is a little bit of a controversy because the original story was fairly small and streamlined and what many people consider to be a fairly basic fairy tale-like children's story. The history of this film is fascinating. It's something I've studied over for years, and I have a lot to say on the topic, but I first want to talk about the film and my overall experience with The Hobbit, because when I first saw The Hobbit in the movie theaters, I have to say I was a little bit disappointed. I did think that they didn't stand up very well in comparison to The Lord of the Rings, which are amazing films. So it wasn't a huge attack on The Hobbit, but The Hobbit just didn't hit with me or the audiences that I was with in the movie theaters. And I do think some of that may have actually been a technical problem having to do with the 48 frames per second 3D projection in the movie theaters. The films, so Peter Jackson was trying to initiate and smooth over a transition from normal 24 frame per second filmmaking into 48 frames per second. And the truth is, people tended not to like the effect. It kind of gave people almost, there's a little bit of a headache that people, I think, were getting, and people were starting, seeing it come across very much like a soap opera, where there's just too many frames being shot and projected to the eye per second, and it does break some of that illusion of the film magic that is created by 24 frames per second. For people who have grown up our entire lives with 24 frames per second film, it gets a little bit awkward to start increasing the frame rates, especially if you don't increase them enough. I think Douglas Trumbull has done some experiments with 70 millimeter film projection at high rates, and he noticed that I think when you get to about 120 frames per second, it becomes almost impossible to differentiate reality from the film itself. And I do think there's a little bit of a comfort in being able to distinguish between a film and reality. And so when you start approaching in too high of a frame rate, it starts to mimic a little bit too closely how people see things in real life too, which can be problematic, except in video games. In video games, it's very useful to have the high frame rate. It helps make things a lot smoother and work better. But when it comes to watching a film, there is a little bit of a comfort in, I think, having those 24 frames. So I have to admit, I was more excited for Lord of the Rings and not as excited to watch The Hobbit. But this is a recent release from Best Buy. It's an exclusive Steelbook edition of the 4K Hobbit trilogy, and it has both the extended editions and the theatrical cuts. And I was looking forward to seeing the extended editions for the first time, because my experience with my family when we first watched Lord of the Rings was we tended not to love the theatrical editions, the theatrical versions of Lord of the Rings, and we only, over time, when we saw the extended editions, really fell in love with the film series as a whole. And a part of me didn't think that was going to happen this time, especially because these new extended editions, they're a little bit lighter. There's only maybe like 15 to 20 minutes more added per film, while in the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, we get about an hour's worth of footage and story and character development added back in. I wasn't sure what 15 to 20 minutes more storytelling per film would do for these films, especially because one of the complaints a lot of people had was that The Hobbit seemed to go on too long. It seemed a little bit too slow paced and maybe stretched out a little bit thin. And I was kind of concerned that simply extending those films even further may not have such a great effect on the storyline and characters, but I was wrong. I have to say, at least with the first film that I've watched so far, which is An Unexpected Journey, which there's only about, 15 minutes added back in. So the theatrical version is 169 minutes long, and the extended edition is 182 minutes long. So it's really only 13 minutes longer, but man, those 13 minutes are important. I think the amount of character development and world building and helping you to orient you better in with the characters and the story is vital. And it really made this film so much better to watch. I will say, I do think that a lot of the old school movie theaters that were showing The Hobbit didn't do a great job because they kept these 3D lenses on the cameras and they tended to project them at too low of a lumen level. And it made the films look a little too dark and dreary in the movie theater, which is a problem that has finally been resolved and fully resolved on this home video, this 4K edition, where it actually looks better on my home video set than it did in the movie theater, which is pretty remarkable. And I have to say, I have to give credit. The people who put together this 4K transfer of the film, they did a great job. It works so well. It looks so beautiful. The landscape, the scenery, it's sumptuous. And the acting and characters they really are coming at me from left field. I didn't know that I was going to connect with them this strongly. I do think it did help to watch Tolkien first before watching this. And I could see a lot of these different themes of what was important in J.R.R. Tolkien's life coming through with Thorin Oakenshield and his dwarven entourage, and Gandalf and Bilbo, and how that band of brothers is formed with that group. It's a beautiful thing to behold. And I have to say, I wasn't expecting to have loved The Hobbit, Unexpected Journey that well as I have. I think that the little extra moments of character development at the very beginning of the film actually help set the tone of why the extended edition is superior to the other theatrical cut. We actually get some of the reasons why Gandalf loves Bilbo and thinks Bilbo is great and courageous and fearless. And he sees Bilbo as a young hobbit, having fun kind of accosting Gandalf with a wooden sword. And when you really understand why Gandalf feels the way he does about Bilbo, the entire story comes into focus. It becomes much better. And the journey of Bilbo and his growth as a character, his whole story arc, becomes so much more significant when you understand that there is this adventurous soul lurking deep down that he's kind of suppressed over the years. And that Gandalf's call to adventure, which he at first refuses, is the thing that he needs to do in order to rediscover and rekindle that magic that was inside of him, that he's kind of let fade away over the years. And I think it's actually a very shrewd move by Peter Jackson to help us to see that journey, because a lot of people do dismiss The Hobbit as a child's story, just like they dismiss maybe their more rambunctious and fun and free and fun-loving version of themselves when they were younger. They dismiss it now and they tend to become more stodgy, conformist, and try to maybe become more of a homebody. And so I think that it's beautiful that the extended cut gives us this little extra moment where we actually care about the relationship between Gandalf and Bilbo. And when you care about that relationship, all the other relationships start to make more sense. The conflicts between Thorin and Bilbo, and Bilbo trying to find a place amongst this brotherhood of dwarves, it really comes into focus much better. And you get some extra moments in Rivendell, which are gorgeous, gorgeous moments that really help improve the pacing and the story so that you're on board with things and that you care about the dwarves' characters as well. Because one of the problems with the theatrical cut you had a harder time connecting. I had a harder time connecting with the dwarves in that. In this extended cut, you get to see more of them and their fun, interesting nature, and how they can be very responsible in their own way, even if they look like they're being freewheeling and causing chaos and problems. There's kind of an organized chaos to it. That's their way. And it's kind of fun in contrast with the elves of Rivendell, who kind of impose a serene order upon everything. To have these dwarves come in and uproot everything, especially in the extended edition, you get a lot more of that. It's more fun, it's more interesting, and you get the interpersonal conflicts between the dwarves and the elves a little bit better, and why their cultural differences, their rocky history really helps come into shape things differently. The Rivendell scenes, especially some of the extended scenes with the Council, with Galadriel, and that relationship between Galadriel and Gandalf, it means more now. And his conversation with her about why he brought Bilbo with him is really like the key to the entire film. It's great. It's a magical scene, and it really makes much more sense in this extended cut. I can't say that enough or emphasize that enough. The extended cut makes you care. It makes all the things that happened in the theatrical cut matter. And the same thing, I hope the same thing goes forward in the next extended editions of Desolation of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies. But before we get into that, so Peter Jackson had a lot of reasons to make Lord of the Rings first, rather than make The Hobbit first, which kind of upset Harry Knowles, who, while I believe Peter Jackson was filming The Lord of the Rings, Harry Knowles went up to him and said, you know, you really should start with The Hobbit first. Introduce the world to those characters, and then let everything carry forward in Lord of the Rings. And, you know, I think that there is a case to be made for that being an interesting thing to do. But Peter Jackson, he said there's a few things that held him back from doing that. One, I think he felt like The Hobbit wasn't quite as amazing and compelling as what he wanted to do with the Lord of the Rings at first, which, you know, given that makes sense. Two, I don't know if he felt like he was up to also doing The Hobbit in addition to doing Lord of the Rings. I think he knew Lord of the Rings was going to be an exhausting process in and of itself, and it's something that he finally, you know, passionately got into later on, but at first didn't want to. And in the production blog, he also comments on thinking, how am I going to make these 13 dwarves differentiated on screen enough to really make the movie work for The Hobbit? And he felt like that was going to be very complicated. I think it probably was a complex logistical issue, but in his final extended cuts of the film, the dwarves actually come out very well differentiated, and I'm starting to remember their names now much more than I did from the first original theatrical viewings of the film. And I'm starting to love each of the dwarf characters, and I have to say, this relationship with the dwarves and Bilbo and Gandalf, it kind of turns it into a hangout film. Quentin Tarantino famously described a hangout film as a movie that isn't necessarily very flashy in plot and story, and it's easy to kind of overlook the film and think it's not that great. But a hangout film is a film where those characters are so fun to be able to go and hang out with, that every few years when you go back to watch the film, it's like you're meeting a group of friends over. It's like you're inviting a group of friends over to your house again, and you get to reconnect with them, and the film hits you in more profound ways. And he says that's a hangout film. And I think The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey is a hangout film. And so I'm pretty excited for other people to tell me what their thoughts are on this rewatch. You know, comment below. Do you agree with me that the dwarven characters, they feel more realized and more differentiated, and they feel more like beloved comrades this time when you're watching than how you felt maybe in the past? I wasn't expecting to fall in love with The Hobbit this rewatch, and so far I am. I'm really loving this story. I'm really loving these characters, And it's really turning out to be like a Tarantino-esque hangout film where I'm on board to hang out with these characters some more. I love these guys. This is interesting. Let's see what they go through next. Let's see how they impact and influence things. So a lot of different scenes stand out to me now in this rewatch as being much better now. And one of them is the scene between Gollum and Bilbo. When Bilbo is confronted by Gollum in the cave and they have a battle of wits. The battle of wits has begun. And Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, morons. No. So honestly, I think the battle of wits between Bilbo and Gollum, their riddle battle, is pretty fun and interesting. And so it is kind of an awesome, amazing scene to see Martin Freeman playing Bilbo act against Andy Serkis playing Gollum in the cave, and them throwing riddles at each other and seeing the genesis of the story of the One Ring finally, basically almost falling into Bilbo's hands. I think it's clear the ring chose Bilbo to be his new bearer. He decided to leave Gollum behind, and it takes as much as it can from its host and leaves them a hollow shell of what they once were as it betrays them and moves on to its next opponent. It always betrays the one that has been holding it. It's pretty interesting when you heard the backstory that J.R.R. Tolkien, when he was first writing The Hobbit, this magical ring that helps Bilbo to be invisible, he didn't have the full backstory on it yet. He didn't know that it was going to be this huge epic sprawling adventure in The Lord of the Rings later on. It's kind of interesting how these things develop over time. And George R.R. Martin, who he added another R into his name to be able to match his hero, J.R.R. Tolkien. He likes to comment on J.R.R. Tolkien, saying that as he was writing The Lord of the Rings to follow up The Hobbit, it was meant to be kind of a simple sequel at first, and then the story grew in the telling of it. And that's something that is remarkable about watching The Hobbit right now, is seeing how these different things that play out very simply really expand into something grand and kind of remarkable over time. And I do find it very touching the way they set up Bilbo having mercy on Gollum at the end of the scene. And Andy Serkis does an amazing job as Gollum and just is all over the place with multiple personalities, and really shows you the conflict of the character and how there's this sweetness and kindness in part of the Smeagol part, and the Gollum part that's took over. Gollum! That you really see the differentiation between the two personas that have dominated in Smeagol to become Gollum. And I think it's remarkable to see that battle happen. The precious. I remember in the production blog of The Hobbit, people talked about how amongst this huge film production, it was great to have this little simple, almost like stage play taking place between Martin Freeman and Andy Serkis. And to have these powerhouse performers really have fun and really get into this scene in the cave with the riddles and the ring being transferred over from Gollum over to Bilbo. It's a remarkable scene. It could be the best scene of the film. I do think, if it's not the best scene, I think it is. It's kind of a linchpin, and it helps really to make so much that happens later on in the Lord of the Rings films mean so much more because of what you see here in that backstory leading up to that. I also had watched a lot of the blogs behind the scenes of what was going on with the production of The Hobbit, which was very entertaining, and for people interested in filmmaking in particular, you should check it out. It was a grueling production of 454 days straight of shooting a film, which is not an easy task. The reason why for such a long shoot is just like in the case of Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson shot all of the Hobbit movies. He filmed them all together at once over the course of one shooting period, and then he would take the subsequent years to edit only 1/3 of the story at a time. It's pretty humbling to watch the production blog where you see that Peter Jackson basically was running a small city of employees in the film production, a crew made up of thousands of people having to go all over the wilds of New Zealand and across on the productions. And you realize this guy is employing a small city worth of people on this film, and having to run such a huge mammoth production. It really, my heart goes out to the guy. It's an incredible undertaking, and I think it's something a lot of people don't realize is an incredible logistical feat, just to be able to make a film like that, just to be able to move the crew, production facilities and quarters and trailers and everything, and get everybody set up out in the wild. It's an incredible logistical feat, and I have to give some love to Peter Jackson and that entire crew on The Hobbit. They really pushed and made some incredible film, and I have to salute you. You did an incredible thing. All these things that we say in the comfort of our homes as armchair quarterbacks right now, when you're out in the trenches making the movies, that's what separates the boys from the men. And Peter Jackson, you have shown yourself to be a great man, and I have to say, your films have really struck me hard, and I think I can't wait to go through and explore all of your other movies soon, as part of our ongoing examination of not just Tolkien this week, but Peter Jackson overall. We're going to get into his filmography as well and explore his other films, like King Kong is coming up. It's going to be interesting. So when viewing the making of documentaries on The Hobbit, to see Peter Jackson really pushing himself to be able to get The Hobbit done. And I think Andy Serkis, who performs in the motion capture rig for Gollum/Smeagol, he really catapulted to fame and has become the go-to motion capture actor ever since, playing Caesar the Ape in the Planet of the Apes new remake series. It's been very popular in the recent decade. And I suspect that one of the reasons why Peter Jackson didn't want to direct this is because of he remembered what it was like to film Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King back to back, shooting it back to back. And I think he knew that was exhausting. That wasn't really something he was necessarily up for, but he pushed himself to get it done, and he got it done. This was a production. This was a show that he put on, my friends. And I think that Peter Jackson needs to get a little bit more love for putting himself through a very difficult ordeal to get this made. And he really put so much of himself in it. I don't know how many filmmakers are capable of shooting for 454 days straight. But what was beautiful to me was the fact that Andy Serkis, he helped shoot some second unit scenes, which basically are, while the filmmaker is with his first unit production shooting stuff, you have a second unit director with another group on another soundstage shooting other footage, pickups, little moments here and there to be put in films, sometimes landscapes, different shots. They're going to be in the final film, but which the director sometimes doesn't have the time to film himself, especially on a production this mammoth and huge. So I thought it was great that Andy Serkis helped out Peter Jackson in that capacity as a second unit director. And in some of the making of scenes, it's fun to see him directing scenes behind the scenes. Originally, The Hobbit was going to be filmed by Guillermo del Toro. He was going to direct it, and it makes sense. Peter Jackson has great respect for del Toro and felt like his fantasy sensibilities would be a very good match with The Hobbit. And a part of me always kind of wishes I could have seen what del Toro's version of The Hobbit would be. But This is the first time when I watched An Unexpected Journey Extended Edition that I finally was happy that Peter Jackson ended up being the director to direct this, because I do think that it helps to blend in with Lord of the Rings better. With Peter Jackson's style and his production design and artistic sensibilities, it helps unify The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings better. At least that's my suspicion going forward. I'll let you know what I think once we get there. When Guillermo del Toro was planning on making The Hobbit, his idea was to make The Hobbit split into 2 films because of how large and long the film would be. And he said that he found a really great breaking point. I haven't heard where that was in the story. He wanted to be kind of the intermission point, but that was essentially what Peter Jackson kind of had the idea of doing. But then MGM, who was one of the primary financiers of The Lord of the Rings before and now The Hobbit, in conjunction with New Line Cinema and some other sources of financing, the movie ended up going into turnaround and couldn't get made for a while because MGM went bankrupt. And because MGM went bankrupt, there's a slate of really interesting films that didn't get released for years, including Chris Hemsworth's early roles in Cabin in the Woods, Red Dawn. Interesting early role of Chris Pratt and Topher Grace, Take Me Home Tonight, which had Chris Pratt and Anna Faris in fun supporting roles in that film. And it really did, I think, stifle a lot of their careers to not have those films released when they were. They had to wait 3 years to get those released. During that whole hullabaloo with MGM, The Hobbit went to turnaround. Guillermo del Toro, he had other projects he wanted to get done, and he couldn't just wait around for years and years waiting for the film to get the financing necessary to go into production. So he had to step away from the picture, regrettably. And when that happened, in order for the movie to finally get made, Peter Jackson had to agree to direct the films himself. One of the things that happened along the way, because I think Peter Jackson originally was intending to do a 2-part Hobbit, just like Guillermo del Toro was doing. However, while he was doing pre-production, I believe he discovered that the Tolkien estate were trying to limit what things Peter Jackson could kind of shoot, because I think Peter Jackson had, if he had his druthers, he would also be able to film a lot of the Silmarillion, which it kind of has a complex story, but it's kind of like a hodgepodge of a lot of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth stories and lore, and some of the storylines of what Gandalf is doing when he's not with the hobbits is explained in the Silmarillion. And I believe Peter Jackson wanted to film the Silmarillion separately. However, the movie rights only gave them the right to do The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And so through some fancy footwork and manipulating the narrative slightly, they were able to fit some elements from the Silmarillion into The Hobbit because it takes place during the same time period with the same characters. So I believe Peter Jackson was able to get permission to adapt parts of the Silmarillion. And so that's one of the reasons why people who are familiar with the Hobbit book, the novel, will realize there's extra stuff in the film trilogy of The Hobbit. It's not there in the novel. And some of that was just made directly by Peter Jackson for the film series, including the introduction of Evangeline Lilly's elven maiden, warrior maiden, who really was actually an excellent ad, I have to say. I think, based off of what I remember of the original Hobbit trilogy, I remember enjoying that character and thinking that she did a great job and was a good addition to the cast. Peter Jackson basically fit a bunch of Silmarillion stuff back into The Hobbit when he made the movies, hence why instead of 2 films, it became clear making them into 3 films made more sense. And a lot of people complained because they felt like there wasn't enough story to justify 3 different films. It required a little bit too much of it rejigging of the original plot to make it work for 3 films. But having just finished watching the first film in extended form, I can say I'm pretty excited to see all of them like this now. And I like the little elements that are added from the Silmarillion back in, including the stuff with the Necromancer and the Council in Rivendell and Galadriel and Gandalf's relationship and Radagast the Brown and his attempts to try to counteract the dark sorcery that's starting to infiltrate the woods and kill off the woodland creatures. And I have to say, I think that was a good idea. I think Peter Jackson, he made the right decision to make it a trilogy. This is based off of me not having seen the other extended editions yet, but I loved having the extra scenes. I loved having that extra time with the characters. It really helped me to connect with the whole storyline much better. So I think that he ended up making the right choice, which, you know, we'll see. But by the end of watching the extended Hobbit trilogy, I'll give you my full thoughts on whether or not I think it was a great idea to include a lot of the Silmarillion in with it. But I think so. The material with the Necromancer, it didn't feel so random this time when I was watching it. It felt more germane to the whole story as a whole. Peter Jackson, he had this kind of unenviable task of doing this huge, long, very intensive and exhausting production again, when it really wasn't something that he wanted to do again. The first Lord of the Rings was kind of his huge, big epic. He put all of himself into it. And I think the idea of him doing that again for The Hobbit was a tough thing for him to accept. I think at first, when I watched the original theatrical cuts, I thought maybe it was a mistake for him to come back when he really wasn't fully on board for it. But I'm suspecting that my thoughts and feelings about Peter Jackson's involvement are going to change quite a bit over the course of this extended Hobbit trilogy. And it already has with the first film. And I think, Peter Jackson, you did a remarkable job. And I think people were expecting The Hobbit to be more like Lord of the Rings. And it's not the exact same story. It's not the exact same sprawling epic. But it is beautiful and epic in its simplicity. And I think that its development of the interpersonal relationships between the dwarves and Bilbo and Gandalf, and later on Elrond, Galadriel, Saruman, are beautiful. It's very interesting. It's a lot more interesting than I first gave it credit for in the theatrical cut. I can tell you that. And I think that it's one of those things that's going to keep on surprising people as they go back to it. I think you'll be as surprised as I was if you really give the movies a chance. I think movie studios, they need to be careful about always trying to limit the running time of films. Some films are meant to be epics. They're meant to have an intermission. They're meant to have two parts to sit through. And the fact that we've been kind of shying away from that and getting rid of the epics, getting rid of the intermission, getting rid of 4 to 5 hour long films, it's to the detriment of us, because not all stories should be told in a 90 to 150 minute window. There's so much nuance in storytelling and character, and so much that can be accomplished through long form storytelling. Like films like Gettysburg and Lawrence of Arabia and the Ten Commandments, they really need to have that time. They need to have that time to showcase the world and the characters. And I do think that The Hobbit would have probably benefited from being filmed in these as longer versions, maybe with an intermission. If not with an intermission, then just show the longer versions, and hope people's bladders hold out. That's I think what we should be doing. Zack Snyder, for instance, all of his movies from Watchmen on, they're all better in the extended cuts. I do think that The Hobbit so far has been proving that the extended cut is superior to the theatrical cut, and it's worth watching. And even for those people who don't want to watch The Hobbit again, watch the extended cut on home video on 4K. That's gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was interesting. It was fun. Here's some technical aspects on the film. So this is An Unexpected Journey. It's the first film in the Hobbit trilogy, and there's a choice between two different discs in here. One is for the theatrical cut, and the other one is for the extended cut. And the extended cut tends to be placed in the primary position, which is good, because I think people would be kind of disappointed watching the theatrical cut after having seen the extended cut and seeing how much better of a film it is. I think that it would be a shame to. I feel the same way about the Lord of the Rings movies. The theatrical cuts, they have their pluses, but all of that character development, world building, extra songs and singing in the story, and just helps you to connect to the story and the world in a way that's just not common. And I really felt that. I felt for the first time that The Hobbit was a worthy predecessor, story-wise, of The Lord of the Rings. I felt these films stand up with The Lord of the Rings now, at least An Unexpected Journey has, in its extended form, and I couldn't be more thrilled, because the truth is I wanted to like the theatrical cuts of The Hobbit, so I was a little bit disappointed that I didn't love it in the theaters. So the fact that I'm able to rediscover it and feel like I'm watching a whole new movie, it's been a huge pleasure, and I think it's something that people should check out. I'm really connected to this, and I hope I feel the same way about the next two films. So go ahead and join me and watch that. And check out all of our other videos for Tolkien Week. We are having a bonanza and having a lot of fun. And come and join us for the party. I'd love to get more people who both love Lord of the Rings, and maybe those people who have had a harder time connecting to it, who want to give it a shot and want somebody to talk to about it. That's kind of the beauty of this channel. I want you to comment below in the channel, and let's discuss these films. Let's not, make videos in response to me too. Post them. Go ahead and link to them down below. Honestly, this is the time and the place to have this discussion. And I think right now, given everything that our country has been going through, both with 2020 and now 2021, all the countries in the world really having to go through these disheartening times, that seeing how these hobbits face their challenges with such courage is going to be a great influence and impact on the world right now. It's something we need to watch now more than ever. And that's the strangest thing. Time has been very kind to The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. It is a much better film than I gave it credit for. And part of it has to do with the extended scenes. But I think as a whole, I think our world has grown into the type of movie that Peter Jackson made 10 years ago. Back in 2011, when he was shooting The Hobbit, can you imagine you're shooting a film for a year and a half? A year and a half of shooting a film. Man, that takes guts. Yeah, I can't say it enough. I think the film crew and everybody on board on that film series did such a spectacular job, and it's unfortunate that so many people often look down on The Hobbit as the lesser trilogy. I think it should really stand with the Lord of the Rings, and if my rewatch is as successful as I think it will be, I think that there probably won't be a Lord of the Rings rewatch I do without doing The Hobbit first now. Movies like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are great at helping us to remember our identity as members of civilized society. And I'll say even little touches like Bilbo not wanting to continue on the journey until he could go back and get his handkerchiefs. When you understand the culture and traditions of England, and which are the predecessors to the cultures of the United States of America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, a major impact and influence on those cultures, you can really understand that, yes, the handkerchief was used by gentlemen and you weren't considered a real gentleman unless you had a handkerchief, and you could help wipe away the tears of someone or give it to a lady who's weeping and going through problems. Use it for yourself, for your own needs, as a Kleenex. But I think that one of the reasons why it's kind of interesting is because you kind of feel the cultural context of, I can't really go anywhere without my wonderful handkerchief, which is kind of funny because Martin Freeman, of course, he couldn't go anywhere without his wonderful towel in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I have to say, I'm impressed with what I've seen of Martin Freeman this time. Richard Armitage really stood out as Thorin Oakenshield. He really brings a dignity and grace to that character, and sternness and kind of power and a kind of fierce fatherly feeling to that character. You can understand why these dwarves have such devout loyalty to Thorin Oakenshield, is because of how good of a man, or how good of a dwarf he is, how good of a leader he is, and how he puts himself on the line to try to help save his people and help them to get their home again. And that's the thing that struck me the most, this viewing of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, is the sense of despair that the dwarves had over being removed from their home in Erebor and feeling like vagabonds, having to travel as almost homeless people in other people's lands, having to rely on the kindness of others to take refuge, but wanting so desperately to be able to return back to their home. And I really connected to Bilbo when he showed empathy with them and their plight and realized, yeah, you know, as a hobbit, that's one of my favorite things in the world, is to be home and comfortable and to have my books around me and sit by a fire and read them. And, you know, they can't have those simple joys, these dwarven characters. And that sense of empathy is what makes Bilbo a hero in this story, at least as he's developing right now, is complete and total empathy and his sense of love. And really, you get an idea of why Gandalf chose to bring him in and why he's so vital to the entire cocktail of dwarves, wizards, and hobbits. Please join me for my next video where we're going to review The Desolation of Smaug. This is really where a lot of the main elements of the story really kick into gear, is in this next film. You know, the dragon, the wood elves, and you know, so many of the characters that we come to know and love throughout the other movies in the Hobbit get introduced finally into this next film. So I'm excited, and I hope to be able to report that the next extended edition is as beneficial and useful of an add-on, those additional scenes, as it was for An Unexpected Journey. Like the video, subscribe, activate the bell to get notified for all the upcoming videos that are coming out, and we continue our Tolkien week with our rewatch of Peter Jackson's film series of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings in chronological order. What do I have in my pocket? Ah, there you are. Well, don't want anything to happen to this new magical ring I found. So, don't forget to come and join us on our adventure as we continue by watching the next film in the Hobbit trilogy, an extended edition in the special 4K limited edition Best Buy exclusive Steelbook edition. And I'll see you soon. And remember, keep up your courage in the face of the corrupting influence of power. Nobody's going to take you away from me, are they? No. You're my precious. Yes. Nobody will take my precious away from me. Never! Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. You can check out our unboxing down in the video below. Happy Hobbit Day and happy Tolkien Week, everyone. Please subscribe, like the videos. All these things help with the YouTube algorithm so that it spreads it out to more people. We get more viewers. I'm curious, what will happen if I actually slide the ring onto my finger like so?